Hi everyone. I'm Dave Connors. I'm the CEO of Distrobind. Distrobind is an automated data exchange for delegated authority. We get data through the value chain from distribution to capacity in very automated fashion, complete data transparency for all parties at every point, and minimal manual touch points. So I'm here to kind of talk about what we call DA 3.0 and standards-free data exchange. So I'll be touching a little bit on one of my pet peeves, which is the idea of common data standards and how we consider those a crutch for bad engineers. So I promise I haven't just put this in for topicality with all the news about Twitter and stuff. But if you've heard me speak before or spent much time with me or follow me on LinkedIn, and if you don't, you really should, this quote lives rent-free in my head. I think about it all the time. And I remember talking to someone about Distrobind in the early days. And what I said to them was, if I get this right, Distrobind would be a system you hardly even use. And they looked at me like I was mad. But what I meant was, you just look at it and you know if things were good, if things were bad, and you take some action, but you wouldn't be working in Distrobind. And Elon Musk obviously said it a lot more snappily and a lot more pithily. And that's why he's the richest man in the world, and I'm not, yet. But today, in the world of what we would call DA 2.0, you're touching 100% of the data all the time, good or bad. We worked with a MGA. They would take an average of 14 submissions for a single BORDEREAUX before it could get agreed. So you go through all these multiple iterations, you have to touch the data constantly. DA 3.0, that is about just getting the data through the value chain seamlessly, without any manual touch point, zero manual touch point for good data. Even errors can get resolved automatically at a lot of points, and input is always the last resort. So if we explain a little about what we mean by DA 3.0, DA 2.0, etc. At the beginning, in a kind of pre-PC, pre-computerized world, granularity was very expensive. So all that really mattered was the aggregate position, monthly, often quarterly. It's all anyone really cared about. And this is what we call kind of DA 1.0. But as sort of PCs came around and spreadsheets came around, you get this kind of increased interest in granularity because data processing, data storage is much cheaper. But obviously then people are jumbling around with different types of spreadsheet, different formats. And this is kind of what led to the idea of a common standard. This idea that, if only everyone sent the same spreadsheet in, wouldn't life be great? So insurers and MGAs would argue about what the approved format is, what a data field should be called, what the data type is. And it hasn't really worked, has it? It's still the biggest pain point really today for anyone working in delegated authority is that spreadsheet. So what we mean by DA 3.0 is standards free, standards agnostic. So it allows any company, group, or market to have their own internal standard while receiving data in any format, and especially data outside of that standard. So it means that the insurers and the MGAs aren't fighting about spreadsheets, about code sets, about field names. Data just flows in and is visible by any party in the chain in the manner and in the format that is suitable for them to achieve what they need. But there is no requirement for any one of their business partners to follow their same standard. So the BORDEREAUX, and I don't know how familiar everyone here would be with delegated authority, but the BORDEREAUX is kind of the standard bearer and the bête noire of DA 2.0. It's just the kind of monthly record of policies written, premium paid, claims incurred, whatever, usually in a spreadsheet format. But a spreadsheet is inherently uncontrolled and inherently uncontrollable. So one of the biggest pain points for producers or receivers of data is the manual production and the manual processing of that bordereau. And that can come down to, different formats. It might not be able to see very clearly, but you should be able to tell that all three of those spreadsheets look a bit different. They're all supposed to be the Lloyd's v5.2 standard. So everything would look a little bit different. You have people who don't know how to wrap text, so they split a header across 2 rows. You have different names, you have different punctuation, you have typos. And what that means is everyone is touching that data. Everyone is having to manually pre-process data. And there has been this big idea that you should have the common standard. Now that may be operated at a market level, like Lloyd's with the v5.2, or it may be an individual insurer going around arguing with their MGAs, you must send me data that looks like this. Pretty much everyone has had that plan. But again, if you've ever spent any time with me, you will know this is another one of my favorite quotes, lives rent-free in my head. We once spoke with an insurer that had spent 6 months internally agreeing what their bordereau standard should be, and then 18 months going around to their MGAs, trying to get them to send it in that manner. And the words to me were, we may as well not have bothered. They had about 5% take-up. The Lloyd's v5.2 has been a failure. The premium is static, the take-up has been poor. We were working in the Lloyd's lab last year with a managing agent, and we had the bordereau technician talk us through everything she would have to do from receiving a bordereau to getting it loaded into their previous generation legacy bordereau system. And she talked us through it, deleting duplicate columns, deleting rows that didn't have real data in them, total rows, subtotal rows, how it would handle, because the bordereau started on row 7 this month, not row 9. And she said a good bordereau would take her 15 to 20 minutes just to get into their system, and a bad one could take up to 40 or 45 minutes. We just took it, we processed it. We didn't touch it before, we just processed it and told them, this is what the data is. These are the things that are right, these are the things that are wrong, this is what you need to do. Her words was, it would take me twice as long as that to delete 1 column. And we achieved that by ignoring what the supposed standard was and just looking at what the data was. And I've already kind of said this, but the common data standard approach is a failure and has already failed. So since the introduction of the Lloyd's v5.2 standard, the London market premium has basically remained static. Whereas if you look at other markets, the US market was already bigger, US program business, and it's growing rapidly. So we look at common data standards as the failed answer to yesterday's problem, and the real answer is to move to what we call DA 3.0, standards-free data exchange. But what do we mean by that? So I'd like to start with a little thought experiment of which of those 2 pairs has more in common, the mouse and the whale, or the biplane and the jumbo jet? And the answer is the mouse and the whale, because they have the same internal structure of the mammalian skeleton. And that same internal structure can be used. It can create the mouse, it can create the whale, it can create a dog, a cat, every single person in this room. You will never, ever, ever take a biplane and scale it up into a jumbo jet. That is something that the market keeps trying to do. But actually, it is the taxonomy or the structure that really matters. So standards-free data exchange is not a free-for-all. It's just that focus on structure and behavior and not format or label or even value in cases. So if you think of the mammalian limb, it can be optimized for grasping, for flying, for running, for jumping, throwing. It doesn't have to look the same. It doesn't have to be called the same thing, each individual part. They don't have to do the exact same thing, but their relation to each other is obvious. And people have said to me, well, you're just semantic nitpicking here, you still have a standard. And my answer to that is not really, because there's an implied structure, because there's a similarity in what they do. But so same way, if you're talking about an insurance policy, an insurance premium, an insurance claim, yes, there's an implied structure there, but you don't actually need to agree on anything else. So two companies who don't agree on a single field name, a single code set, how they're going to identify classes of business, what the layout should be, they should still be able to share data very easily. Even, they may not agree on whether multiple locations on a property risk should be in repeating columns or repeating rows. They should still be able to share data. In the world of DA 2.0, that's impossible without one of them either changing their standard or one or both doing a lot of manual pre-processing. In DA 3.0 and in DistriMind, the data just flows. But to be clear, this is not just an intellectual flex. This is exactly what DistriMind does. So some of the practical applications and use cases of what we're doing, we've taken a V5.2 compliant risk bordereau. We've taken a premium statement with 8 data points in French. We've reconciled it to the risk, pulled the risk data across, and output a V5.2 compliant premium bordereau. We're using OCR to process marine cargo declarations and XML messaging to process Dutch financial crime. And we're able to put all that into a single platform, single process for a global insurer and not a bordereau in sight, completely bordereau free. We have an MGA who has data they need to send to their carrier that they do not receive from their retail broker. We generate that data for them based on the other data, and we send it out to the carrier. No fighting with their retail broker, no banging the table saying, why aren't you giving me this or that? Just worrying about whether the business is good. We are facilitating the entire creation, submission, error handling, and reporting of data entirely via API without touching our UI once. We are receiving 2 completely separate transaction code sets and transforming them into the insurer's internal code set, while simultaneously converting 2 wildly different bordereau formats in different languages into a single consistent internal format for their EDW. And we're taking an EDW from an MGA and turning that into the bordereau that their various different insurers need. And not a single one of those things needs any producer of data to change what they're doing today, and it doesn't need any single receiver of the data to do any manual pre-processing on that data. We're also amusing ourselves internally by trying to find the very worst possible bordereau that we can still turn into a compliant London Market CDR. That's not for a client, it's just because we can, so that one is a flex. But so it's clear, really, that when I'm talking about DA 3.0 and standards-free data exchange, it's not a description of a future state. It is the description of what we do today. It is how we are changing the paradigm of delegated authority for our clients, and how we would love to do it for everyone else. This is the way it should be. So if you would like to find out more, my details are up there. Please reach out, or I and some of my colleagues are going to be around for most of the day. So please come and say hello, book a meeting. Thank you very much for listening. See you. Thank you.